KOWS 107.3 FM in Occidental, California. It's Monday, September 19th, 2011. On the phone from Southern California, we have John Cobb Jr. Good morning, sir.
And good morning to you.
How's the weather? It's gorgeous here.
Well, it's slightly warmer than I would choose, but very comfortable otherwise.
All right. Is the air chewable, or is it clear?
Oh, the air is quite clear.
Okay.
The sun is bright.
All right. Let's see. John Cobb Jr. has been with us before, to wit, on March 22nd of 2010, on December 20th of the same year, and on March 21st of this year. And we're always happy to have this gentleman with us because of his stature in the world, his extraordinarily accomplished career, and his the gifts that he brings us in terms of his keen understanding and intelligence.
And I'm glad to come on just to hear the introduction.
Absolutely. Well, I'll try to embellish it just a little more every time. I still think of you as a philosopher-theologian. Is that still negotiable?
Oh, yes.
All right. And you cool your heels at the Claremont Theological School?
Well, I've been retired for 21 years, so I wouldn't really say that's where I cool my heels. I cool my heels in a retirement community called Pilgrim Place.
Uh-huh. And that's where you're sitting now?
That's where I'm sitting now.
Okay.
That's in the same town, so it's not very far away.
Well, I know that you keep your hand in over at Claremont, yes?
Well, I still have some friends there, though most of the faculty that I was with has moved on. The Center for Process Studies that I'm very much involved with is located on the campus, so that keeps me connected.
Okie doke. I send our listeners to the earlier interviews that Professor Cobb has participated in for more background and more stories and context about Dr. Cobb's career. Let me just say now that John B. Cobb Jr. is an American United Methodist theologian who played a crucial role in the development of process theology. He integrated Alfred North Whitehead's metaphysics into Christianity and applied it to issues of social justice. And that Dr. Cobb was born in Kobe, Japan, to parents who were Methodist missionaries, and moved to Georgia as a young man, as a teenager, and attended Emory College, now Oxford College at Emory University in Georgia, joined the Army, and I've been through all this before, and I'm reading off of Wikipedia, which I don't trust. So,
well, they didn't make any significant mistakes so far.
All right. Well, introductions are my weak suit. So, would you like to say hello to our listeners once again? There are more than ever.
Well, and, I congratulate you on that. I'm not. Yeah, I didn't come into an electronic age, and I'm having difficulty adjusting to it, but I suppose talking to listeners on the telephone is not an extreme case. And I certainly appreciate the kinds of questions that you ask, so I'm delighted to be with you.
Excellent. Well, we've had nothing but positive feedback from your appearances on the radio with us. I just want to name a few of your books. You have a long, prolific career as an author, and I've been going through the list, and just the titles are evocative, and I think they're. I love reading a few of them off, if you'll let me. Some of the books that Dr. Cobb has authored include A Christian Natural Theology, based on the thought of Alfred North Whitehead, The Structure of Christian Existence, God in the World, Mind in Nature, The Interface of Science and Philosophy, edited with David Ray Griffin, The Liberation of Life from the Cell to the Community, Talking About God, Doing Theology in the Context of Modern Pluralism, Christian Identity and Theological Education with Joseph Huff, His probably the most well-known book written with Herman Daly, called For the Common Good, Redirecting the Economy Toward Community, Environment, and a Sustainable Future. Becoming a Thinking Christian Faith and Religious Diversity, Mobilization for the Human Family, and that's just a few. So we get a flavor for how essentially you've spent your life and what areas of thought you have been devoted to.
Yes, indeed.
There's big news coming up in a few weeks. The school, Claremont Lincoln, is hosting a conference called Brave New Planet. Is this something that is of immediate interest to you?
Well, I'm the one who caused it to happen, so yes, it's very definitely of interest to me.
Okay.
It will not actually, although Claremont Lincoln University has agreed to be one of its sponsors, it came out of Progressive Christians Uniting, which is an organization that I co-founded with George Regas about 15 years ago, I guess. And I have been the chair of the Reflection Committee. We've produced several books of position papers over the years. But when we thought about what we needed to do next, we discovered that we collectively had crossed a certain boundary in our thinking about what was going on. And I could, in my own case, I can contrast it with a conference that we held here in 1972, which we called Alternatives to Catastrophe. And I think in 1972 there were alternatives to catastrophe, and I sort of held on to that faith for a long time, even after it was very difficult to. But we found that we realized that there is now no way of avoiding extremely serious global catastrophes, that the global civilization we now live in is self-destructing. So we thought that we needed to focus on how we live in a time when the planet we're living on is going to become much less friendly. And none of us felt we really knew how to write papers on that subject. So for the first time, we decided we'd have a conference instead. So that's how this came into being. Mm-hmm. It was a decision that we could no longer work on preventing catastrophe. Of course, we still must work on keeping it from being as bad as it might be. And after we had decided that we wanted to do that, we came across the book by Bill McKibben, which is spelled E-A-A-R-T-H. And his reason for sticking an extra A into the name of the planet is that he is quite certain of the same thing that I was speaking of. There is no way to prevent global warming from going past the point that it is just a minor issue. It will go on to the point that some parts of the world will become uninhabitable, and many parts of the world will suffer catastrophic changes. But like us, he wants to put the emphasis on, what can we do constructively, beginning now, but in preparation for dealing with much more serious problems in the future. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different conference from Alternatives to Catastrophe, but in terms of my own life history, a kind of next step. Now, that was more than you wanted to know.
No, it wasn't, sir. This is very serious business, and I can't think of anything more worth our time than to talk about it carefully. The conference has the title of Brave New Planet with the subtitle of Imagining Ecological Communities.
Yes.
So
what we want to do is to say this civilization that we live in is obviously not going in a happy and comfortable and voluntary way to transform itself into what it would have to be sustainable. But as this civilization collapses, there will be opportunities for building something new in the ruins of the old. And what we want that to be are sustainable ecological communities. And almost everyone who thinks about that thinks that it will be a matter of communities, that it will be at local levels that sustainable human life can be regenerated. And so we are bringing together about 45 people who will be speaking publicly, I guess, who will help us think about what kinds of communities we should aim now at creating, because we can already begin, even before the political and economic structures that we have developed collapse. We can begin to build new local communities that have a chance of surviving that collapse.
Mm-hmm. Is it generally accepted that there is no alternative to a massive human die-off?
Well, obviously not. The topic is not even talked about publicly. And I think, however, that among people who are really paying attention to what is happening, the number who will argue, no, we are greatly exaggerating, that there are real alternatives, and of course there will be a technological fix. The number of those who are really prepared to engage in serious dialogue is not as great as I expected. I thought when we decided to take on this topic that we would meet a lot of resistance, and I have been amazed at how little resistance. I mean, we will have one breakout group leader who wants to who's taking on the topic. Have we exaggerated the seriousness? But if he says we have exaggerated, he will not say that in a very radical way. So we may be exaggerating. I don't know. I don't think so. But Bill McKibben's specialty has been change of weather. And so that's the point at which he says we have now crossed the line that even of course we won't do it, but even if we stopped now pumping greenhouse gases into our context, our environment, what we have already done is causing new things to happen. That is, as we melt the ice in the Arctic, I assume the same is true in the Antarctic, a larger portion of the Earth's surface becomes water, and water absorbs the sun rays, whereas ice reflects them. So that will tend to lead to further heating of the planet. And as the tundra thaws, I should say, which it is doing on a massive scale now, that releases methane, which is a more dangerous greenhouse gas than the carbon and so forth. So he says we cannot prevent heating the planet in ways that will make it unable to support life to anything like the extent it has been able to do so in the past. That's a very hard truth to accept, but I think it's only by accepting realistically the situation we have brought upon ourselves that we can think realistically about how to make the best of it.
I guess another quiet question that sits in front of us is whether there's any realistic possibility of any human survival whatsoever.
Well, Bill, I'm quoting Bill McKibben not because he's the one from whom I came to this conclusion, but but he's the one whose book I have most confidence in at the moment, being specific. Bill McKibben, you may have picked up from the paper, got himself arrested in Washington recently over what seems to most people a kind of minor glitch. That is, he's begging the president not to approve a pipeline from the tar sands of Canada to the Gulf. Now, that seems like, minor matter, but the tar sands of Canada hold an enormous amount of fossil fuels, of combustibles from which oil could be made and extracted, and it would enable our economy to overcome the peak oil problem, which many people focus on, and continue to expand its use of just those things that are causing the most damage. I think the hope has been that as we hit peak oil, we will recognize that we have to live with less of those things that are so damaging. But this is a way of avoiding that or postponing that. Of course, you never can't avoid it altogether. And so he said, if we burn all that stuff that's in those tar sands, then the planet will probably become, strictly speaking, uninhabitable. So it's worth a night or two in jail if that can make any difference in terms of decisions that have such a terrible effect upon the future.
Mm-hmm. One of the phrases that is in the literature announcing this conference, which, by the way, will be October 28th and 29th, and there's also related events, a pre-conference lecture, a post-conference concert, and a PCU-related post-conference worship service. I think Mr. McKibben is going to...
We're going to be working him hard.
Yes, sir. I want to see that sweat. Anyway, the term, it says PCU, this is Progressive Christians Uniting, presents Bill McKibben on climate change and a faithful response.
Yes.
So a faithful response is seems like a really, really good place to start to look this thing square in the eye and...
PCU is, of course, that means Progressive Christians Uniting.
Yes.
So we are a Christian group, and Bill McKibben is himself a faithful Christian, lay Methodist to be specific. But, of course, we're not limiting ourselves to listening to other Christians. Mm-hmm. A Christian response is to learn whatever we can learn from whoever can teach us. Mm-hmm. However, a major effort of the conference is to get churches to send teams. And I think there will be maybe 10 churches that will send at least 4 or 5 people. And then my view is that if a church selects people or sends a group consciously as a congregation, that when they come back, what they have to say and propose will generate further discussion and sometimes even action in the church. So we think that the best thing we can do is to try to stimulate local congregations to rethink their mission. Doesn't mean give up everything they've been doing. A lot of them are doing many, many good things, but to think about their mission for the future in a different way. And I'm optimistic that will happen. And of course, we hope that what happens in a few churches around here can spread to others. One of our opinions is that whereas many people could view the church in the past few decades as a rather minor part of society, the basic things being taken care of by economic and political and educational institutions, as the global civilization that we have constructed collapses, the local congregations are going to become much, much more important. And for them to try to prepare themselves to play a responsible role when they're called on for so much more. That's something that we can begin to work on.
It's quite wonderful, really. There's this feeling that we're all coming home with multiple meanings to that. The Christian church, of course, is all-inclusive, and I could easily envision a greatly multiplied role of the local churches as they come to grips with greater and greater reality.
I think that will almost certainly happen. I don't know whether the big mega churches will function well. They may. It's really, if we're going to have to rebuild from the bottom up, it's going to be those communities of faith that don't collapse because they don't require something from the outside in order to exist. That will have the largest responsibility, I think. We don't want to say history repeats itself, but the one experience that the ancestors of most of us went through that would be at all comparable would be the collapse of the Roman Empire in the West. And it was, of course, the church that was able and called on to rebuild a new civilization on the ruins of the Roman one. I'm sure it will not be the same, but nevertheless, that's a kind of analogy to what I'm anticipating.
Well, there's a great opportunity here for all of us in so many ways, including our institutions and including the churches.
Yes.
There's a destiny to be fulfilled.
Yes.
And it's
a time of we just have to say this is a really make or break time, and how we respond to the call. If the religious communities are fighting each other and jealous of each other, we're going to be in real trouble. So the whole movement toward ecumenicity within Christianity and friendly relations with other communities of faith is an extremely important part of preparing. I mean, has been going on. That's one of the ways in which there's been most progress in the past 25 years, I would say. So many ways we've gotten worse, but the relationships among the religious communities have gotten much better, I think, overall. And that's wonderful. So we need to build on that. Wherever we find we're already doing the right thing, we certainly don't want to quit that. Obviously, in a time of collapse, food becomes the number one problem. I mean, you can look at the Horn of Africa or the situation in Haiti at various points, in Russia after the terrible summer they had and so forth. And having enough food for the people is primary. Now, in Russia, the national government is still structured and effective. I think in Haiti and in the Horn of Africa, that's probably not true, and one finds local leadership even more important. But already here we see the crumbling. I mean, it doesn't have to. We could do better, but the economic system and the political system are jointly no longer feeding hungry people as well as they did even a few years ago. And the group that's trying to step into the gap are the religious communities. So we get a little tiny foretaste of the way in which responsibilities devolve upon us.
Well, it's likely all not going to happen overnight. And
oh, no, it won't all happen at once. There are a few places in the world the collapse has happened. But here in Southern California, the collapse that has happened is not one that is necessitated. That's just simply human greed and stupidity that's causing the collapses we are now experiencing.
What is so compelling to me, Dr. Cobb, is that even if it is too late for us, in whatever time we have, the opportunity to regenerate our hearts and souls and to fulfill the message of Christ, to fulfill the promises of the great religious traditions and spiritual traditions, all of it still sits in front of us.
It does indeed.
And to the degree that we respond to this with any kind of grace and honesty and care, I think we can achieve much more than perhaps we've achieved as a human family, perhaps even for many thousands of years.
I think there's a chance that we would really learn that we need to function as a community, that being in competition with one another and being responsible only for a few people, leaving the rest to suffer, that simply won't do. In our local communities, we must develop a deep care for each other so that we can take care of each other. And that way, far more of us will make it. With the present dominant ideology, I'm afraid that we would resort to violence and war, and that, of course, could easily lead to the end of the human race. We have the nuclear weapons to wipe ourselves out, and whether we will use them, thinking that somehow that will help one group. I mean, no one can believe it would help the world as a whole. But when you don't care about anybody except yourself and your limited group, then you may be prepared to wipe out other people, even if that endangers the future of the whole planet. I don't want to emphasize this. I'm just saying there are some pretty horrible scenarios. And whether we will go that route depends upon what values we have. And I do think, as you do, that the values that almost all the religious traditions have taught, but I will focus on Christianity and certainly say the values of the Bible have become radically countercultural. To be a real Christian is to really reject the values that now run the world. And if that world that we are rejecting is destroying itself, then we have the possibility of bringing into being a different kind of world, at least many, many, many local communities in which something much more like what Jesus envisaged as the Passover Theou might be realized. In that sense, we can be genuinely hopeful.
I am.
Good. I think hope is a Christian virtue and is very different from optimism. Therefore, I can say enthusiastically that I hope. I'm not very optimistic.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look good at all. But just acknowledging that we can be very, very happy practicing real Christian love here.
Yes.
While we're here.
Yes, I'm a happy person. I've had a fortunate life, and I think I find things to do that seem to me important, and other people will work with me, and that makes for deep personal happiness, I think, doing the work that Christianity calls me to do.
I'd like to talk about Claremont Lincoln. Is that all right?
Yes, by all means. I say, I wonder, maybe you should explain to the audience what Claremont Lincoln University is.
Well, correct me, please. My understanding is that Claremont Lincoln University which is in its first few weeks or months of existence, is the first university in the history of humankind to embrace the training, the education and training of all the great religions of the world under one roof, together.
This is its hope and intention. Right now there are 4 religious traditions that are involved in some way.
And they are?
They are, of course, the Protestant school of theology that's been here for a long time. And then there is a Jewish, a kind of non-denominational Jewish institution that is, it cannot be identified as Orthodox, Conservative, or Reformed. And then the Islamic Center in Los Angeles is going to make use of the new university as a place to prepare imams. Then the Jains are the 4th group. Well, some people say Jains. I'm still a little confused about the pronunciations. I'll say Jains. The Jains are a group, an Indian group, a very, very ancient one, who practice a concern for living things in a very radical way. That's a challenge to all of us to take the teachings, the marginal teachings of our own traditions much more seriously than we do. So those are the 4 that have now signed up to work together in the development of the university. The university is eager to have others, and I think there's some prospects of a Buddhist group joining, but I shouldn't get into that because I'm not on the inside of any negotiation. But well, your vision, I mean, is open to all, let's put it that way. And I think that it, again, has an attraction that is going to bring in others over time. Now, let me say that's one thing I'm very enthusiastic about. Perhaps just to make it clear, I should say, each group will have complete responsibility for how it prepares its own leaders. There is no attempt of Christians to tell the Jains how they should prepare leaders for the Jains, and so forth and so on. So it is not a matter of doing away with the differences among traditions, but if people study side by side and sometimes take classes with other people in their fields, and then there are other courses that all the groups feel, or several of the groups feel, are appropriate, there will be all kinds of new experiments and mixtures. That's the way that's conceived. The other thing is, I have become more and more upset about the fact that the modern university claims to be value-free, and to be value-free really means to serve money, because when other values don't function, then the person who pays for it gets what he wants. And I think that the American university has, as a whole, become as much a negative as a positive factor in our society. Now, that's harsh language, I know, but I do believe it. The new university will make no claim to be value-free. It seeks to find those values that are shared by the religious communities of the world. And the most pressing, the most prominent of those is that all of the religious communities believe that the world is important, and that it is important to have a healthy planet to live on, and that it's important that human beings work together, not in competition with each other, and so forth. I mean, these are very general values, but it means that the goal will be to prepare people to make a really positive contribution in the world, not just to prepare them to get a better paying job, which is what ends up being the function of the modern university. So it's a new idea of what the responsibility of a university is, and it avoids sectarianism by being open to all. One of the people who spoke at the opening ceremony calls himself a humanist. So it's a very broad understanding of what the religious communities of the world can be.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say that it's the fulfillment of all my dreams, only I never had dreamed it, so it's beyond my dreams.
Mm-hmm. It's quite wonderful. I'm holding a copy of the keynote address at the opening convocation of Claremont Lincoln by the South African ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool.
Yes.
And with your permission, I'd like to read a little bit of it.
Please, take your time.
I also don't want to neglect mentioning that your colleague, Philip Clayton, is the initial provost of Claremont Lincoln.
That's right.
And we had the great pleasure of having him on this show on May 17th, 2010, and on July 18th of this year. And those interviews can be accessed.
You probably have discovered that he is a man of extraordinary gifts, and I think Providence has been at work in having him available at the time this university was coming into being. I can't imagine anyone doing a better job.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, read it, please.
Yes, sir. This is parts, a couple of parts that I've selected out from the keynote address to the opening convocation of Claremont Lincoln University by the South African ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool. He said on the occasion, this was September 6th, this was a mere 13 days ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's right.
He said, "Today is more than the inauguration of a vision by David and Joan Lincoln. Today we join them in an exercise of courage by asserting that cooperation and respect among the religious communities of the world should not remain on a pedestal of that which is admired and aspired to, but remains perpetually elusive. Together with the brave pioneers of the Claremont Lincoln University, led by Dr. Jerry Campbell, its president, we embark on an uncharted journey of desegregating religious education, of focusing our energy on finding solutions rather than occupying the ramparts of ideology and doctrine. Today we say that there is more that unites us than divides us, more that compels cooperation than confrontation, and more that creates common ground than exclusivism and enmity." May I continue?
Please do.
We all have fragments of a divine and noble purpose, more often than not variations of the same principles and purpose. In the vision of David and Joan Lincoln, this institution should reflect the power and potential of the Golden Rule, reflected in the multi-religious composition of the university, but also in the outcome of a religious education that repairs the world with the exhortation by Jesus to, quote, "love thy neighbor as thyself," or with the logic of the Torah that teaches that, quote, "that which is hateful to you, you do not do to your fellow," or the unconditional assertion of Muhammad that, quote, "none truly believe until they wish for others what they wish for themselves." So, one more, if you don't mind, because, frankly, I find these words quite moving and worthy of being...
Being there was a moving experience, I can assure you.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple more lines. "We have to be brave and resolute, as the visionaries and drivers of this institution have shown a capacity for. Certainly those who peddle only extremism and ideologies of certitude will not tolerate that you can train Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and other clerics at a single institution. They cannot be convinced otherwise as long as their claims to exclusivity and uniqueness are the cornerstones of their worldview." This is what the Claremont Lincoln University offers, an opportunity to share fragments of truth and pieces of the puzzle, firstly to overcome our own demons represented by the extremism, exclusivity, and intolerance we spawned, and the way we have allowed some in our name not to follow God, but to appropriate God, and so contribute to the misery of society. Simultaneously, we must allow the graduates of this institution to revel in the multiplicity of worship, ritual, pageantry, and tradition of the many faiths that must come to the Claremont Lincoln University, but they must also seek to enjoy the wonderment that comes from recognizing the divine in each other and acting on this insight in ways which cultivate a better world through compassionate relationships, collaborative efforts, and peaceful acceptance. And these were the words of Ibrahim Rasool at the opening convocation of Claremont University just a couple of weeks ago in Claremont, California.
I thought he deeply understood what the school was about and expressed it powerfully.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Cobb, I invite you to make any further comments on the Brave New Planet Conference or Claremont Lincoln University. I also want to let you know that the guests following you on this show in just 15 minutes are Michael Nagler and Stephanie Van Hook from the Meta Center for Nonviolence.
Oh, great.
You may or may not be aware of Professor Nagler's long distinguished career in the field.
I'm sure only very tangentially. I'm sure there's much more to know. The move to nonviolence, I'm sure you understand, is absolutely essential to humanity having a positive future.
Would you be agreeable if we brought them onto the microphone?
I would be delighted to hear them.
All right, I want to introduce Michael Nagler and Stephanie Van Hook from the Meta Center for Nonviolence.
Good morning, Ken. Thank you for having us. And colleague, Professor Cobb, I'm just so delighted to be with you here on the air. Stephanie?
I really would love to hear some of the things you are doing in your center.
Well, we can both fill you in on that. I'd be happy to. I just want to say in advance that any colleague of David Ray Griffin is a colleague of mine.
Oh, I'm delighted to hear it that way. Yeah. David was once my student and for many years my colleague and now my leader in the 9/11 Truth movement.
Yeah. Well, I am a good friend of Jim Douglas, who has written a scathing...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Lightning East to West, and now written scathing books on the assassinations. And I think something is coming up that's going to make a difference. But what we're trying to do at the Meta Center is basically promote nonviolence and give anyone who wishes to the opportunity to learn more about it. We find that often people are plunged into a nonviolent movement of some kind without really knowing how to do it. Egypt is the most recent example. And if we can get in there with some high-quality information on both the strategies and the principles, our aim there is to enable them to do it more safely and more effectively.
Now, you haven't had a successful program in Washington, D.C. yet.
That is the last place where we expect to score.
Yeah.
God, Stephanie, do you want to say a little bit more about some of our programs?
Well, sure. We work with, as Michael said, people who are directly involved in violent struggle and who want to use nonviolence to be more safe and more effective in their work. And we also work with individuals who are interested in learning more about nonviolence because they want to change the culture. So we give them a framework for understanding nonviolence and especially principled nonviolence, which is the framework which will help us to change the culture. And we realized just the other day after reading some interesting articles in Tikkun magazine that perhaps Meta is one of the very few organizations in this country who is looking at nonviolence from a principled perspective, with really keeping that legacy of Gandhi and King alive, not misinterpreting it.
Yeah. We happy to say we recently signed a contract with an organization called Waging Nonviolence, and we're going to have a regular column with them, which we're searching for a name for at the moment. And so we've been putting out an op-ed a week for them, and they distribute it pretty widely. We have started, Stephanie's very good at organizing, putting together courses, and we've taught the first course, or at least in the first session, with the National Peace Academy. And we're going to do one in November called Secrets of Spiritual Activism with them.
And over the summer we did a conference or rather a workshop for teachers, a weekend retreat where teachers came to Dillon Beach. We rented a house together, and we spent a weekend exploring ways of bringing nonviolence into the classroom and deepening our understanding of its core principles, ideas, how it makes us better people, and how to uphold the human image through it. Yeah.
I'm curious whether you know Paul Chappell.
Yes.
Yeah, we know him very well.
He spoke here last week.
Oh, wow.
We both spoke together, actually, Saturday at a conference called Imagine Peace in Berkeley.
I just couldn't help but see the connection.
Yeah.
He was just on the show here with me 2 weeks ago.
Paul gets around, I have to say.
Gosh,
I didn't think I was ahead of you on this, but I just wanted you to know how much we appreciated his presentation here.
Dr. Cobb, I wanted to ask you about whether there's any particular tradition of nonviolence or conceptualization of it in the Christian tradition per se. Or is it a more modern notion?
Well, I would say that Jesus' teachings are fairly explicit.
Yeah, if you...
And I think that the opposition to violence plays a role in many of the founders of the major traditions. At least the ones in India. I mean, of course, the Jains I spoke of are carrying nonviolence very far because they think we shouldn't be violent to any life form at all. And,
as for Jesus, I'm sure you're more familiar than I am with the work of the Jesus Seminar and the general idea of the Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith. And I'm a big fan of John Dominic Crossan.
yes.
And he has argued very persuasively that Jesus was basically starting a nonviolent revolution.
I don't see how one can really argue against that.
No, you don't have to be Walter Wink to see this.
No, but of course the history of how the church, I mean, in the early centuries, the church was very strongly opposed to violence.
Yeah. Till the donation of Constantine, I guess. If you want to
the worst development took place with Charlemagne.
Yes.
Prior to Charlemagne, the church itself tried not to engage in violence, and the engaging in violence was held to be sort of inherently bad. I mean, there were Christian troops, of course, Christians in the army, but when they came home and wanted to get back into the congregation, they had to go through a purging. Mm-hmm. You see, I mean, symbolically they're saying, you've been doing terrible things.
Yeah.
But under Constantine, the church actually said that those who fought to extend the Orthodox Christian views as Charlemagne understood them were getting brownie points.
Is that about a century and a half before the First Crusade is launched?
About that,
yeah.
So, of course, you can see how, with that understanding of Christianity, then the Crusades can follow. I think Crusades would have just been unthinkable in the first 600 years of Christianity.
Yeah.
So I had been, before I really understood this about Charlemagne, I had been inclined to think that it was Constantine who was the villain, but I mean, it's one step after another.
That's right. There's a story.
But the Charlemagne thing is
I'm so interested.
It really crosses the line, so that you actually more likely to go to heaven if you will fight to advance the cause of the church.
And that's where we've been ever since.
I'm afraid so. We are all Carolingians.
I was a Merovingian.
Fortunately, not quite all. I think that that there were peace churches during the Reformation period, and some of them have survived to the present.
Yeah. And then in the 12th century, you had this interesting popular peace movement in France and other parts of Europe.
Yes.
You're probably familiar with this interesting little book by Geoffrey Nuttall called Christian Pacifism in History.
Unfortunately, I have not seen it.
Well,
there are so many good books I haven't seen.
I sometimes think we haven't seen the best ones. But it simply documents 5 waves of what he calls biblical or gospel literalism, or discovering the core message of Jesus. 5 episodes or epochs of this from the gospel period down to our own. And it's a tragic situation. I had developed this model that religions go through 3 phases. There's the visionary or period where a great prophet arises, of whom Jesus has got to be one of the greatest, certainly. And you mentioned, the others in India and around the world. But that revelatory phase can't last very long because the message is too difficult for ordinary people. If the religion is going to spread, there needs to be some accommodation. So it starts to get watered down, as you said, in stages. And then finally, all that's left of the religion is its prestige. And people who want to be violent and otherwise, greedy and what have you, they take that religion as a kind of fig leaf. And at that point, in the process, it starts doing more harm than good. But there are always people who will rediscover it and come back to the core and reawaken it.
Mm-hmm. It's been very important to me. You mentioned the contrast between the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important that we not locate that in Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Paul is not to blame for most of the things that people have accused him
of. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Professor Cobb, because I'm always going around saying that Augustine should not be dumped on, and he's being unfairly blamed for just war and original sin. And I think so now, if you do that for Paul, I do it for Augustine, and we'll restore the tradition to its rightful place.
Yes, I think we have some awfully good stuff in our early centuries to look back to and to get inspiration from.
I mean, after all, if you think it's legitimate, Corinthians 1:13, you couldn't find a better document than that for inner peace.
If you just read Paul carefully, I don't think there is... Well, I think Paul was much more interested in the historical Jesus than people give him credit for.
Now,
but
have you written on that?
I wrote, I co-authored an interpretation of the book of Romans.
I see. That's what I was thinking of.
And with David Lowe. Mm-hmm. I don't even have the linguistic skill to do this kind of thing myself. But I was with a person who had the technical skills, so I think. And one of the things that we discovered, I don't mean no one else had discovered it, I just mean it can be discovered over and over again, is that the whole idea that we are saved by our faith is not really Paul's view. We are justified by the faithfulness of Jesus. But you would never know that from reading most of the translations. And that's a very different way of understanding our relationships.
Very
different. We can participate in Jesus' faithfulness. That's what it means to be a Christian.
That's beautiful. Stephanie and I are both studying and practicing meditation with Sri Eknatheshwaran, who passed away in 1999 up here. He founded the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation, and we were listening to a videotape of his just recently, and he was stressing the cardinal importance of faith, and he went on to say that, none of us really has it originally, but you absorb it from your teacher. His faith is so unshakable that we are drawn. It's like a great attractor that pulls us closer to it. And then from that point forward, it just becomes a matter of our own experiences confirming that faith.
I think that was the most interesting thing that I had learned from Sri Ishwaran, that it's not that his faith comes from direct experience of God. And so what faith means to me, which is, a sort of trust in that teacher, for him, it comes from direct knowledge. Yeah.
Well, and the idea of faithfulness means more than I think it's a richer notion than the term faith. Because it involves your whole life. The whole quality of living is to be faithful.
And as Ishwaran, among others, have always pointed out, we have faith, whether we have decided on it or not. We all have faith in something every time we get on the freeway.
Sure.
It's just a question of what are you going to have faith in? That's where your discrimination and your ability to feed back from your own experiences and constantly...
That's where idolatry becomes such an enormous problem.
Yeah.
Well, I need to go pick up my wife and take her to lunch.
Well, this was... you're very gracious, Dr. Cobb, because this was kind of sprung on you.
Well, no, the more you spring things, so we just talk spontaneously, the better.
Well, it's very rich to hear you speak with Dr. Nagler and Ms. Van Hook as well. And once again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the radio and giving our listeners the opportunity to visit with you and to catch up with what's latest in your thinking and feeling. And congratulations on the conference coming up at the end of October. And
everybody is welcome to come.
Well, it's a place to be. I would love to come myself. I don't know if I can do it, but
I don't expect everybody to come.
Yeah,
We'd be in trouble if everybody came.
No, just anyway. Thank you once again, sir, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
And
we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you, Dr. Cobb.
Bye.
Dr. John Cobb, Jr. Down in Southern California, now retired from the Claremont Theological Schools and sitting on the legacy of a long, distinguished career as a theologian, philosopher, writer, and an active participant, an active instigator in many worthwhile, far-reaching, influential projects. Always good to hear from Dr. John Cobb. We're going to take a short break. You're listening to the What Now Show every Monday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's KOWS 107.3 FM in Occidental, California. We live stream at KOWS.FM. And the website, I frequently, every chance I get, I refer to guests who have been on the show, spoke about the earlier appearances of Dr. Cobb and of the new provost at Claremont Lincoln, Philip Clayton. And it's www.pantedmonkey.org, P-A-N-T-E-D, pantedmonkey.org. You'll find a real good, solid education there. It's a privilege to do the show. And we're going to be back. Michael Nagler